system. So it just, front page of the paper, this was the big thing coming into town, was instant runoff voting. So that's why we had to rush our signatures to put it on the ballot. We knew at that point we weren't going to get the press we needed because there was a whole new thing coming in. Right. So then they said, well, you only have 4,000 signatures that are valid. You have 10 days to get 1,000 signatures. And at that point, we made a decision to turn around and face the group pushing IRV, and we're going to challenge them. And for 3.5 years, we challenged them. We filed a lawsuit against them, and we went all the way to the Minnesota Supreme Court. And on a facial challenge, okay? And what that means is we challenged it before the election took place, versus if we challenge it after the election, it's called an as-applied challenge. So we ended up losing the facial challenge. Judge Magnuson ruled that since a winner can emerge in the first round, without getting into too much on how it works, right. Basically you rank up to 3 candidates. If nobody has 51%, then they throw out the candidate with the least amount of first choice votes. And then they count those. To the right. Choices, yeah. Right, exactly. And so what Judge Magnuson said is, and it was a completely erroneous opinion, that in order to succeed in a facial challenge, you have to show that in every application, IRV is unconstitutional. And he says, the fact that somebody can win in the first round means that that's one application that you failed to show that instant runoff voting was unconstitutional, so therefore you lose. And even in the Supreme Court hearing, he started talking about ice cream cones, and he said instant runoff voting is like buying an ice cream cone. He said if you want chocolate and they don't have it, you get your second choice, vanilla. And here we have a Supreme Court justice talking about ice cream cones, comparing an election system to ice cream cones. And we had some op-eds printed in the Pioneer Press and other newspapers, and we're saying, it's not like going in and buying an ice cream cone, because when you go in and buy an ice cream cone, you look up at the menu, and if it's not on the menu, you order whatever you want on the menu. But you don't let other people in the store, in the restaurant, help you choose what kind of ice cream you're gonna have. Right. But anyway, we believe we're in a good position. We're getting ready for round 2. We're gonna file an as-applied legal challenge in the next 60 days, approximately. Basically, the opinion invited a challenge. And so we think we're going to prevail. We might even end up all the way in the U.S. Supreme Court, because this particular voting method is spreading across the entire country. Right. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, are you familiar at all with the instant runoff voting, or did? Yes,
just a little, yeah.
In Burlington, Vermont, the Republicans there are really upset about instant runoff voting. In fact, they have a referendum to get rid of it. As many cities are doing that are using this. Mm-hmm. But what happened is they had 5 candidates in the mayor's race. They had a Republican, a Democrat, a Green, an independent candidate, and a progressive. And everybody went in and voted, first choice, second choice, third choice. And in a city that's more liberal than St. Paul and Minneapolis combined, Burlington, Vermont, that's where Howard Dean's from, and all these other people, the Republican actually got the most votes. But he didn't have 51%. So when it kept going to the next rounds, the progressive candidate, Bob Kiss, ended up winning the election. So the Republicans in Burlington are furious.
Oh, sure. I
mean, their guy had the most votes, and the race ended up going to a progressive because he didn't have 51%. Right. And 90% of the folks who voted for Kurt Wright, the Republican candidate, didn't rank a second choice. And that comes down to the fundamental arguments in IRV.
What you eventually actually come out with IRV, especially in the situation that you just described, is all the voters got their basically the majority got their second choice.
Right, that's absolutely right.
No one really got their first choice.
Right, and what that essentially means is that some ballots carry more weight than others. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's our fundamental argument. So when we go back through the courts again, one of the things the court's going to have to overrule, to rule against us, they're going to have to, number one, rule against Brown versus Smallwood, a Minnesota Supreme Court decision from 1915. But what they're ultimately going to have to say...
Which was?
In Duluth in 1915, there was a similar ranking system that the court said was unconstitutional, the Minnesota Supreme Court. And the conclusion said, we do right in upholding the right of a citizen to cast a vote for the candidate of his choice, unimpaired by second and additional choice votes cast by others. So it was a beautifully written piece, and it applies to this one. Although,
very much so.
and
It sounds
although,
almost like a,
yeah, although I think Judge Magnuson made up his mind before he even went
Was
in there.
Magnuson on a court of appeals or was he on a Supreme Court?
He's the Chief Justice,
Okay.
right? But just by all the questions he asked, you could tell that he already made up his mind. Alan Page was one that actually was getting it, because he asked the city attorney, and he said, "Counsel, do you mean to tell me if I only like one candidate, I have to rank other candidates just so my ballot carries as much weight, even though I'm opposed to them?" And he said, "This is wrong." See, so Alan Page was getting it. Should we have to vote for somebody that we're totally opposed to, just so our ballot carries as much weight? And that's the answer that the court's going to have to answer when we come back for an as-applied challenge. That it's okay for some ballots to carry more weight than others. And we think it's ridiculous. And that's why this is potentially a U.S. Supreme Court issue. So basically, the Minnesota Voters Alliance is focused on two primary things.
Okay, let's move to the other one now.
Okay, it's preserving one person, one vote, and requiring photo ID at the voting booth, which is the main reason why I called. And the instant runoff voting is a whole kind of a convoluted subject. There's been a lot of talk about requiring photo IDs. Tom Emmer has been working hard with a lot of other Republicans to get a photo ID requirement in Minnesota elections. And every time they come up short, because the House and Senate in Minnesota are stacked with Democrats.
Yeah.
And they don't want a photo ID requirement. Even though 75 to 80% of the population supports photo ID requirement, for some reason the Democratic leadership thinks it's a bad idea.
Well, it's not hard to figure out the reason.
Well, what's your guess, Tim?
Well, my guess is that they know darn well they benefit from illegal voting, and they want to keep it up as much as they possibly can.
Right. I mean, I think that's
That's not hard to figure out at all.
right. Right. So what we thought is, you know,
And this is old stuff. This goes all the way. This is 19th century politics. Boss Tweed stuff.
yeah, everything from busing people in to vote
Right,
in precincts where they're not residents, to dead people voting, to you name it.
right. And as Tim Severson, who was on your show, I happened to catch at home a couple weeks ago, or Dan Severson, who's running for Secretary of State.
Right.
I actually met with him a couple of months ago. He said that's his primary issue, is requiring photo IDs. And so what we thought is, we had a lot of experience with home rule charter cities for the past 6-7 years.
Yeah, you do.
That's kind of what we worked on. And so we know what the statutes say, and we said, we're looking at what's happening in the legislature, trying to get photo ID passed. They're just, every year is just a brick wall, bam, you know, you're out of here, just because of the current makeup of the legislature. And so we said, why don't we get a petition going in St. Paul, which is a home rule charter city? And the statute is clear that home rule charter cities can control their own elections. This is Minnesota Statute 410.21, even if it has provisions that are inconsistent with state law. I mean, it's really cut and dried.
Okay, so in other words, you're saying maybe we can try and get this passed on a smaller scale,
Yes.
and then, as an example, and then build it from there.
Right. There's 107 cities in Minnesota.
Attack them on every front is basically the
Right,
motto.
right. There's 107 out of 800 and some cities in Minnesota. 107 cities have a home rule charter, okay, that are home rule charter cities. St. Paul, Minneapolis, Duluth, all the major ones are home rule charter cities, but there's 107 in total. What we wanted to do was pick two major cities, okay? So St. Paul made sense, the capital city,
That's pretty major.
and then we picked Duluth, so we have some northern representation. The reason we didn't include Minneapolis, and we still might, we're going to find out by Friday. We don't really need to. But we think we're going to be challenged, okay? We're going to turn these in by August 10th. We need 8,000 or 7,100 signatures to turn in, okay? In Duluth, it's a lot less because it's a percentage of
Right.
who voted.
Percentage of the voters.
So we're going to turn these in, and the Democrats are going to 100% guarantee they're going to challenge us, even before it goes on the ballot. They're going to come up with equal protection arguments. They're going to come up with all these arguments.
Right, you're alienating voters. and
Right.
all
So